Hello, everybody out there in Listeningville, Audio Town, Podcastingtonston. I am Daniel, and with me today is my co-host Derek, but absent today is our third co-host, Maddie. But she'll be with us in the first episode and episodes following, which the first episode has already been recorded. We are aware it's very long, and we intend to split them up in the future. And the reason we intend to split them up is because the nature of this podcast is about viewing or reviewing and discussing film series in their entirety, as well as movies that fit similar themes, and as well as movies that are remakes of original ones and comparing them and things of that nature. Really, it's about discussing what I call branded properties. What a branded property is a movie or series that gets a butt in a seat through no merit of its own except that it's related to an already known idea. So an example of that would be something like Sherlock Holmes or Star Wars, or if there was a new Godfather movie, I'm sure everyone would see that. And that's the kind of thing we're going to be discussing on this show. And although we're going to be reviewing things on this show, it's mostly going to be an in-depth type discussion. And that's why the shows are going to kind of run long and have to be split up. We're going to really get into the meat and themes of different things and how they affected us personally and how we think they impacted the culture. And I'm going to leave this off to Derek now to explain to you about the different segments or reasons we might review something. Derek?
All right. Hi, guys. So we'll be doing a pretty wide variety of different types of franchises and movie series, being things like Mad Max, which is fairly popular, to things like the Philip Marlowe movies, which are kind of a series of movies that were done by different directors at different times, but they all star the same character, Philip Marlowe. Not too well known, but they're really interesting. Some of them are really great, and so we're going to be trying to keep that varied. We'll also be doing basically Walmart bin franchises, which aren't actually literally franchises we found in Walmart bins. But sometimes you find these movies at Walmart and dollar bins that are like, 4 movies that are kind of have the same theme, have the same actor, like 4 Audie Murphy movies or Audie Murphy westerns or something. We'll be doing those, but they'll be, pretty much created by us, movies that we associate with each other for one reason or another, but are not literally related. Things like Inception, The Matrix, The Science of Sleep, and Eternal Sunshine of a Spotless Mind. So, 4 dream movies. And sometimes we'll be doing movies with very strange connections or strange made-up connections. Things like well-received movies hated by their own writers. That's a very specific topic that we'll probably cover eventually, but we have quite a bit of those. So, yeah. So I'm going to go into slight depth about the different tangents we might go on during one of these overall discussions on certain franchises. So sometimes we'll be getting into stuff that I like to title In Defense. So if there's an entry in the series or franchise that is not well received, what we think is maybe has been treated unfairly or deserves more praise than it gets, we'll probably put that aside for its own special discussion. An example of that would be Return of the Jedi in Star Wars, even though we're not going to be doing, that I can foresee, a Star Wars episode. Return of the Jedi is seen as usually the weakest of that series, and so if we were going to do it, we'd put that aside for an In Defense. The other ones, let's see, okay, we might do something titled Pre, which is if we're talking about a franchise or a series of movies by the same director, we would talk about maybe the movies that director made before he made his breakout film. An example of that would be M. Night Shyamalan, his breakout film being The Sixth Sense, so we might do a separate segment of movies that he made before that, which I know for a fact that he's written and directed 2, maybe more, but I know 2 for sure. We might try and do something called WCHB, which stands for What Could Have Been. An example of that would be Warhead 2000, which is a James Bond movie that almost came out in 1998 starring Timothy Dalton, which would have been another remake of Thunderball, kind of like Never Say Never Again, except the same story again, so not really any different, but that was almost a thing, so we might discuss stuff like that sometimes. We also might do something that's pretty similar called WSHB, which is What Should Have Been. An example of that would be, we all know about what Alien 3 could have been. We probably won't talk about that on the podcast because it's something that's been talked about to death. But if we were going to do it, Alien 3 is a good example of that. A movie that didn't turn out so well but had great potential. We'll be doing segments I like to title Versus. So an example of that would be Scarface versus Scarface versus Scarface. So there was obviously the famous 1983 Scarface with Al Pacino, but there was also a Scarface in the 30s, 20s, 30s. I haven't seen that yet, but when we watch that, we might do an episode about Scarface. And there's a remake that's going to be coming out next year, which I'm not excited about, but if we do Scarface, I'll see it, and we'll talk about it. And I guess related to the segment In Defense, we might do something that doesn't have a title yet, which I've temporarily labeled In Offense, which are beloved entries in franchises that we think might be getting more praise than they deserve. An example of that would be Rocky IV, which I am not a huge fan of, but is typically seen as the best Rocky, inexplicably. I don't know why. But
if Rocky IV is your favorite Rocky, you're gonna have a bad time.
And we agree about the Rocky IV thing, but sometimes we'll be doing things that only one of us believes, deserves more praise than it gets, or vice versa, gets too much praise. But if one of us feels a certain way, we'll probably let that person devote a certain time to conversation. So yeah. I also want to get into fan theories. I know shows like this typically have segments about fan theories. We're not going to be repeating a bunch of fan theories that we hear about unless they're super interesting, or sometimes we might come up with our own. We don't find those to be too important, but sometimes they're fun to talk about, so those might make their way onto the podcast sometimes.
And that's going to be the show, and we look forward to being in your ears. Bye-bye now.